for so long, Cuba has been isolated, and it's very divisive because some people say, oh, we've got to establish trade with them. No, we don't. They've screwed the people of Cuba. We don't want them, and it's just on and on. I watched the videos that you did from Cuba, and it's obviously totally different than Louisiana when your plane lands there.
It is. The first thing that strikes you is that you are cut off communications-wise. Being someone who probably spends a little more time on his smartphone than he should, not having any kind of cell service or data service and only having internet in my hotel room and then not being able to get to certain websites one day, being able to get to them another, that was probably the toughest thing to deal with initially. Now, the people of Cuba were absolutely wonderful. They were genuine. They were engaging. They were interested in why we were there, what we were doing. And, you talk about some of it being different from Louisiana. I also found a lot of similarities, especially in Old Havana.
Yeah, I can understand that. And so many people have seen pictures or video of Cuba, and they say, oh, look at all those great old cars. A lot of people just don't realize they're not like monuments. They're old cars from the 50s that people have actually been building engine parts for because they've got no new cars. Nothing there's new.
No, at least nothing from the States is new. And even some of the newer cars, I saw a couple of new Hyundais. I saw one bright, shiny, brand new Mercedes-Benz, and I don't know who that belonged to. But other than that, it was a lot of old cars, a lot of old Peugeots. You can tell that they've been doing whatever they can to keep these things running. And it's not just the cars, but you go out to a farm. We went to a farm cooperative which had 127 farmers all sharing one 1949 tractor.
And from what I saw the video, it was in really good shape.
Considering 1949, absolutely, but they get the parts wherever they can. My last night there, I rode in a 1951 Dodge, but it had a Polish engine in it. So it's just whatever it takes to keep these vehicles and these things running. And, a lot of you talked about the divisive discussion about trade with Cuba. I think that regardless of your feelings about the politics, the people there, I believe, would benefit from trade with Cuba, having been there firsthand, just because they're beginning to have a free market in Cuba. The Castros will be out of power in 2018. Raul Castro's announced that he's stepping down. So things are starting to fall into place where I think that we should see some kind of openings with trade with Cuba in the very near future, especially when it comes to agriculture.
A lot of people who are younger than I am and maybe older than you are don't understand what the whole embargo is about. When the missiles came from Russia to Cuba, President Kennedy just had the whole place shut off, basically. And, we won that little battle. And all along, Fidel Castro and his brother Raul have just kept things going the way they were when they took over from Batista. And a lot of people don't realize that the country has got some major, major violations of civil rights. And other people understand that, and they don't want anything to do with the Castros because of that. And I know some Cuban Americans now that live here that don't want anything to do with Cuba. They love some of the people, but they think those people are crazy for supporting the Castros.
It's tough, especially when you deal with some of the older families, because one of the discussions that will have to come up in all of this is reparations.
Right.
You have Cuban Americans who fled the country and had their property seized by the state. So I think that's going to be one discussion that is going to come up as the relations or the communication begins to flow both ways again. I can tell you now it was not a topic which came up during the discussions between Congressman Rick Crawford of Arkansas, Congressman Abraham of Louisiana, and State Senator Francis Thompson. While we were there, what did come up at least once was Guantanamo Bay.
Right.
And the American presence there. So, there are some things that need to be worked out. But on the other side of it, one could argue, and I'm not making this argument. I'm just saying one could argue that there are similar violations with other countries with whom we trade.
Absolutely.
With which we trade, and one of the ones that comes up often would be Saudi Arabia, China.
Right. Our guest today is Avery Davidson from This Week in Louisiana Agriculture and the Louisiana Farm Bureau. Recently completed a trip to Cuba, and I wanted to talk about the whole Cuba trip. It wasn't just to go check out the sites. We're talking about possibly shipping rice to Cuba, and I wonder how that will affect the South Louisiana economy, what's going to happen with sugarcane. Can you give us a little bit of insight onto those?
Well, rice would be a perfect export for Louisiana. For one, we grow a good bit. Our neighbors in Arkansas grow a lot of rice, and they're right there by the Mississippi River. It could all come downriver. And as the example given while we were in Cuba, speaking with the director of North American Trade for the Ministry of Trade, you know, it takes rice 36 days to get from Vietnam to Cuba. It only takes 36 hours to get from Louisiana to Cuba. Lake Charles is set up perfectly, especially with that rice rail facility, to send rice to Cuba. So rice would be a big winner here. I know a lot of sugar growers are concerned about sugar coming from Cuba into the United States. What I saw there is their infrastructure is not set to be able to export much sugar. Their mills are not they're not as advanced as what we have here in South Louisiana.
Well, Avery, you know, even if they were more advanced, it's also the size of Cuba compared to the Louisiana cane industry would be almost, well, maybe not insignificant, but smaller, and I don't think it would affect it, but you never know.
Well, and the only thing that Cuba would really have going for it is the climate. You know, Cuba being so far south would have a longer growing season, be able to grow more cane that way, grow it more like they do in South Florida, where they actually allow it to flower. Whereas in Louisiana, we got to worry about the freezes. We're the northernmost point in the world in which we grow sugarcane. So our varieties are specially bred to be here, and what we've done to streamline our sugar industry really speaks volumes to what it does and what it does for our economy. In speaking with Congressman Ralph Abraham about that, he said, you know, if it were ever to become an issue where Cuba could send too much sugar to the states, I would address that in Congress.
And speaking of Congress, can you tell us about Congressman Rick Crawford's Cuba Agricultural Export Act? That
is the bill that he has sponsored. He's got about 25 co-sponsors on it right now. And from what I understand, this would open the door for financing. Because the big thing isn't necessarily the demand in Cuba, it's the cash flow. Right now, anything the Cuban government wants to buy from the United States, it has to pay for in cash upon arrival.
Right.
And because of the trade embargo, the banks, which would normally issue that financing, are scared to do so because then they would lose their relationships here in the United States. So this would open the door for some financing for Cuba to be able to buy agricultural goods from the United States.
And, you know, something that I was thinking while you were talking about some of the other things about repatriating some of the money that was taken from people. Let's say we just normalize all relationships with Cuba. How difficult would it get some businesses to say, I'm going to invest in Cuba and hope to God in 5 years they don't nationalize everything and take it away again?
Well, I think that would be something that would be of high concern for any investors, and I think that might initially stymie some things. However, you already have Starwood hotels going in and managing some properties, building up some properties. There are bids for air travel,
right?
Which I can tell you now, seeing the infrastructure at the international airport in Havana, they need to build something up. If you're talking about having about 100 flights a day in and out of Cuba, that airport is not going to be enough. It's smaller than Acadiana Regional.
Wow.
So yeah, it's tiny, and it reminded me of an airport that I went to in the Midwest in South Dakota, and it was a very nice airport, but not for a large number of planes. Wouldn't be able to handle it. So
Right.
I think that infrastructure has to be built up as well.
Now, Avery, something that nobody has mentioned yet. Everybody's thinking, oh, Cuban cigars. And I just wonder if all of a sudden the allure of Cuban cigars will fade because they will be legal once this embargo is lifted. I don't see cigar traffic to be that huge in the near future.
I don't think that's the big thing that we have to gain from trade with Cuba. Where I see us gaining would be their biotech research. While we were there, we went to a facility that does a lot of their biotech research, and you can definitely see where the Cubans have invested over time. Healthcare and education, not necessarily in other places, and I'll go into that in a moment. But talking about what they've done biotech-wise, this facility has come up with a drug, when given to diabetics with foot ulcers, has reduced the number of amputations in Cuba by 80%.
Wow.
This same facility has found a vaccine for cattle, which makes them 99% resistant to ticks.
Wow.
The USDA went to Mexico and bought some of this vaccine because they couldn't buy it directly from Cuba, went to Mexico, bought the vaccine, did their own tests, and found it 90% effective.
Incredible.
So an independent study by the USDA found that. They've also done amazing research in preventing HIV transmission from mother to child. So all of these things, I think, are where we're really going to gain. And there are already patents in the United States for these vaccines and drugs, but there's no way to distribute them because we don't have a trade agreement.